The blood-stained letter trembled in Catherine Blackwood's hands as she fled deeper into the forest, her breaths coming in ragged gasps that matched the frantic beating of her heart. The towering pines of Wyoming Territory swallowed her whole, just as she hoped they would, the September of 1875 painting the landscape in hues of amber and gold that contrasted sharply with the darkness she carried inside. "They'll never find me here," she whispered to herself, clutching the tattered shawl around her shoulders as the wind picked up, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. 3 days had passed since she'd abandoned the small cabin on the outskirts of Silver Creek, leaving behind everything she'd ever known. Her husband's body would have been discovered by now, along with the evidence of what he'd done to her sister. Catherine stumbled over a fallen log, her worn boots catching on the gnarled wood. She fell hard, scraping her palms against the forest floor. Pain shot through her wrists, but it was nothing compared to the agony that had driven her here. She pushed herself up, wiping dirt and blood on her already soiled dress. The forest was growing denser, exactly what she wanted. Civilization couldn't reach her here, judgment couldn't find her. The sound of rushing water guided her forward. She needed to drink to rest, if only for a moment. The creek appeared suddenly, cutting through the trees like a silver ribbon. Catherine fell to her knees beside it, cupping the icy water in her hands and bringing it to her cracked lips. Her reflection rippled back at her hollow cheeks, dark circles beneath blue eyes, and matted honey-brown hair that had once been her pride. What would happen when they discovered what she'd done? She hadn't meant to kill him. She'd only wanted to stop him from hurting Clara. The memory of her sister's broken body on the cabin floor made her stomach heave. She retched into the stream, her empty stomach providing nothing but bile. Night was falling fast in the mountains. Catherine knew she needed shelter, but exhaustion pulled at her limbs, making each step a battle. She found a hollow beneath the twisted roots of an ancient oak and crawled inside, pulling her knees to her chest. "I'm sorry, Clara," she whispered, tears streaming down her dirty face. "I'm so sorry." Sleep claimed her eventually, fitful and filled with nightmares. She didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats or the soft whicker of a horse as it paused nearby. Kade Morgan had been tracking the woman for the better part of 2 days. As the newest deputy in Silver Creek, he'd been given the job nobody wanted, hunting down the wife of Jeremiah Blackwood, wanted for his murder. Kade had his doubts about the story from the start. He'd known Jeremiah, known his reputation for cruelty, though the man had kept it carefully hidden behind a veneer of respectability. He dismounted from his chestnut gelding, tethering the horse to a nearby branch. The woman's tracks were clear to him, leading to the massive oak tree ahead. Most men would have missed the signs, but Kade had spent years learning from the Shoshone before taking the deputy's badge. "Mrs. Blackwood," he called softly, approaching with caution. His hand rested lightly on his holstered Colt, though he had no intention of using it. "Catherine Blackwood." No response came from the hollow beneath the tree. Kade crouched down, peering into the darkness. She was there, curled into herself like a wounded animal, dirt and leaves tangled in her hair. In sleep, her face was peaceful, belying the violence that had led her here. "Madam," he said again, reaching in to touch her shoulder gently. Catherine awoke with a scream, scrambling backward until her spine hit the gnarled roots. Her eyes, wild with fear, fixed on the man before her. "Stay away," she cried, fumbling at her side for a weapon that wasn't there. "I'm not here to hurt you," Kade said, raising his hands to show they were empty. The silver star on his chest caught the moonlight filtering through the trees. "I'm Deputy Morgan from Silver Creek. You've come to arrest me," she said, her voice hollow. "I won't go back, I can't." Kade studied her face in the dim light. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps 25, with delicate features marred by fear and exhaustion. "I've come to bring you back, yes," he admitted, "but I'd like to hear your side of the story first." Catherine laughed, a brittle sound that echoed through the trees. "My side? Does it matter? A woman who kills her husband doesn't get to have a side." "It matters to me," Kade said simply. He sat back on his heels, giving her space. "I've got coffee in my saddlebag and some jerky." "You look like you could use both." Suspicion narrowed her eyes. "Why would you care what I have to say?" "Because I knew Jeremiah Blackwood," Kade replied, his voice hardening slightly. "And I've seen what he did to your sister." Catherine's composure cracked at the mention of Clara. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over onto her cheeks. "Is she?" "She's alive," Kade said gently. "Doc Williams is caring for her. She's asking for you." A sob escaped Catherine's lips, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle it. "They told me she was dead. I saw her on the floor and there was so much blood." "She's stronger than she looks," Kade said. "Like her sister, I'd wager." For a long moment, Catherine said nothing, weighing her options. Finally, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I'll tell you what happened. But not because I expect justice. There's no justice for women like me." Kade stood, extending his hand to her. "Let me get you that coffee first, then we'll talk." Catherine hesitated, then placed her trembling hand in his much larger one, allowing him to help her from the hollow. His palm was calloused but warm, the touch gentle despite the strength evident in his frame. He stood over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and lean, with a face that spoke of long days under the sun. Dark hair curled from beneath his hat, and his eyes, a warm amber in the moonlight, held no judgment. "I won't run," she said, reading his thoughts. "I'm too tired." Kade nodded, leading her to where his horse waited patiently. He untied his bedroll, spreading it on the ground near the base of a pine tree. "Sit," he offered, then busied himself building a small fire. Catherine watched him work, his movements efficient and practiced. Soon a tiny flame bloomed, casting dancing shadows across his face. "How did you find me?" she asked as he set a small pot of water over the fire. "I'm good at tracking," he replied simply. "And you weren't covering your trail." "I didn't think anyone would care enough to look," Catherine admitted. Kade glanced up at her, something unreadable in his expression. "The sheriff cares about justice being served." "Justice," she repeated bitterly. "There's no justice in Silver Creek, not for women." "Maybe not in the past," Kade agreed, measuring coffee grounds into the now boiling water. "But things change. People change." The aroma of coffee filled the small clearing, making Catherine's empty stomach growl audibly. Kade pretended not to notice, pouring the strong brew into a tin cup and passing it to her, along with a strip of jerky. "Thank you," she murmured, warming her hands around the cup before taking a cautious sip. The coffee was bitter but fortifying, bringing warmth back to her frozen core. She chewed the jerky slowly, savoring the first food she'd had in days. Kade settled across from her, nursing his own cup. "Whenever you're ready," he said. "I'm listening." Catherine stared into the small fire, gathering her thoughts. "I married Jeremiah 5 years ago," she began. "I was 20, naive. He was charming, successful. My father had just died, leaving debts. Jeremiah offered security, respectability." She laughed without humor. "He waited until after the wedding to show his true nature." Kade said nothing, his face impassive in the firelight. "The first time he hit me, I thought it was my fault. I'd burned his dinner. The second time, I'd spoken to the banker too long at church. After a while, he didn't need reasons." Catherine's voice remained steady, detached, as if she were telling someone else's story. "I learned to hide the bruises, to smile in town, to be the perfect wife, until Clara came to live with us 3 months ago." Her hands tightened around the cup. "Our mother died last spring. Clara had nowhere else to go. She's only 18, beautiful, spirited, everything I used to be." Catherine's voice caught. Jeremiah noticed. Kade's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "I tried to protect her, to keep her away from him, but..." Catherine closed her eyes, the memory washing over her. 3 days ago, I came home from delivering mending to find him, with Clara. She was crying, fighting him. There was blood. I grabbed his hunting rifle. I only meant to frighten him, to make him stop." Tears slid down her face. "He laughed at me. Said no one would believe a hysterical woman over him. Then he came at me." "And you fired," Kade finished softly. Catherine nodded, opening her eyes to look directly at him. "I'd do it again to protect Clara. I'd do it 1,000 times. If that makes me a murderer, then hang me. But don't send my sister back to that house." Kade set his cup aside, considering her words. "Did anyone else know about how he treated you?" "Everyone knew," Catherine said bitterly. "But Jeremiah had money, influence. The sheriff played cards with him every Saturday night." "Sheriff Taylor retired last month," Kade informed her. "Sheriff Dixon is in charge now. He's a different kind of man." Hope flickered briefly in Catherine's eyes before dying. "It doesn't matter. My word against a dead man's, and I ran." "You ran to protect yourself," Kade corrected. "After years of abuse and witnessing an attack on your sister, any reasonable person would understand that." "Are there reasonable people in Silver Creek?" Catherine asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Cade's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "A few, more than you might think." The fire crackled between them, sending sparks into the night sky. Catherine felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her again. "What happens now, Deputy Morgan?" "Now you rest," he said, rising to his feet. "Tomorrow we head back to town. I'll take your statement officially and we'll speak to Clara and the doctor. The truth will come out." "And if the truth isn't enough?" Catherine asked. Cade's eyes met hers across the fire. "Then we find another way." Something in his tone made Catherine believe him, though logic told her not to trust anyone, especially not a lawman. She finished her coffee, setting the cup aside. "I haven't slept properly in days," she admitted. "Take the bedroll," Kade offered. "I'll keep watch." Catherine wanted to refuse to maintain some semblance of independence, but her body betrayed her. She could barely keep her eyes open. "Thank you," she murmured, curling onto the surprisingly comfortable bedroll. Within moments, darkness claimed her, this time without nightmares. Kade watched her sleep, the firelight casting a golden glow across her face. The lines of worry and fear smoothed in slumber, revealing the beauty that hardship had tried to erase. He'd been tracking her with a singular purpose to bring Jeremiah Blackwood's killer to justice. Now, he found himself with a new mission to protect this woman who had already endured too much. Dawn broke over the forest, filtering through the pine needles in shafts of golden light. Catherine stirred, momentarily disoriented until the events of the previous day came flooding back. She sat up quickly, searching for the deputy. Kade was already awake, tending to his horse a few yards away. He turned at her movement, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "Morning," he said. "There's water in the canteen if you want to wash up. I'll make more coffee." Catherine nodded, grateful for his matter-of-fact tone. She took the canteen and moved a discreet distance away, using a corner of her shawl to wipe the dirt from her face and hands. Her reflection in a puddle was still a mess, hair tangled, dress torn and soiled, but she felt more human than she had in days. When she returned to the camp, Kade had coffee waiting. He handed her a piece of hardtack and some dried fruit. "Not much of a breakfast," he apologized. "It's more than I expected," Catherine replied honestly, accepting the food. They ate in companionable silence, the forest coming alive around them with birdsong and rustling leaves. "We should reach town by nightfall if we ride double," Kade said finally, gathering their few supplies. "My horse Thunder is strong enough to carry us both." Catherine eyed the massive chestnut gelding with trepidation. "I haven't ridden in years." "You won't have to do much riding," Kade assured her. "Just hold on." He doused the fire with the remaining water, then mounted the horse with practiced ease. Extending his hand down to Catherine, he waited patiently as she gathered her courage. She placed her hand in his, allowing him to pull her up behind him in one smooth motion. "Put your arms around my waist," he instructed. "It's the safest way to ride double." Catherine hesitated, then circled her arms around him, feeling the solid warmth of his body through his shirt. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been this close to a man without fear. The sensation was both foreign and oddly comforting. "Ready?" Kade asked, glancing over his shoulder. Catherine nodded, tightening her grip slightly. Kade clicked his tongue and Thunder moved forward, picking his way carefully through the trees. The rhythmic swaying of the horse's gait was soothing, and Catherine found herself relaxing incrementally as they traveled. They rode in silence for a time, Catherine watching the forest gradually thin as they made their way down from the mountains. Eventually, Kade spoke, his voice carrying easily back to her. "How did you end up in Silver Creek?" he asked. Catherine considered the question. "My father was a surveyor for the railroad. We moved around a lot when I was young. After he died, I came to Silver Creek because I'd heard there was work for a seamstress. I met Jeremiah at a church social 3 weeks later. You're good with a needle then." "Very good," Catherine said, allowing a hint of pride to creep into her voice. I can make anything from wedding gowns to men's suits. It's how I kept us fed when Jeremiah drank away his money. Kade nodded thoughtfully. Silver Creek could use a proper seamstress. Mrs. Hollister does what she can, but her eyesight's failing. Catherine was silent, unable to imagine a future in Silver Creek or anywhere until her fate was decided. What about you, Deputy Morgan? You're new to town. Came to Silver Creek 6 months ago, Kade replied. Before that, I rode with the Rangers in Texas, and before that, I was a scout for the Army. That explains the tracking skills, Catherine noted, but not why you'd settle in a place like Silver Creek. Kade was quiet for a moment. I got tired of violence, he said finally. Thought a small town might offer something different. Catherine couldn't help a bitter laugh. You found it anyway. Violence is everywhere, Kade acknowledged, but so is goodness if you know where to look. The philosophical turn of the conversation surprised Catherine. This man was not what she had expected from a deputy, not the brutish enforcer she'd come to associate with the law. Sheriff Dixon is a good man, Kade continued. He believes in justice, real justice, not the kind that favors men with money. I hope you're right, Catherine said softly. They stopped at midday beside a small stream to rest the horse and eat a sparse lunch. Catherine's legs were stiff from riding, and she walked along the bank to stretch them, feeling Cade's eyes on her. We're about 4 hours from town, he informed her as they prepared to leave. Is there anything you want to tell me before we get there? Anything that might help your case? Catherine considered the question carefully. Clara isn't the first woman Jeremiah hurt, she said finally. There was a girl who worked at the laundry, Mary Jenkins. She left town suddenly last year. And Widow Peterson's daughter. She would know more, Kade nodded, committing the names to memory. That helps. This time when they mounted, Catherine didn't hesitate to wrap her arms around Cade's waist. The solid presence of him was reassuring in a world that had become increasingly uncertain. As they rode, the landscape gradually shifted from forest to rolling hills, and finally to the open grassland surrounding Silver Creek. When the town appeared on the horizon, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the stagecoach road, Catherine's arms tightened involuntarily around Kade. I'm frightened, she admitted, the words barely audible. Kade covered one of her hands with his own, the gesture brief but comforting. Stay close to me, he said. I won't let anyone hurt you. They rode down the main street as dusk was falling. Catherine kept her head down, but she could feel the stares of the townspeople, could hear the whispers as they passed. Kade rode directly to the sheriff's office, dismounting and helping Catherine down before tethering Thunder to the hitching post. Sheriff Dixon, he called as they entered the small office. I've brought Mrs. Blackwood. A man rose from behind the desk, older than Kade by perhaps 15 years, with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of years in the sun. His eyes, however, were sharp and assessing as they moved from Kade to Catherine. Mrs. Blackwood, he said, his voice neither kind nor cruel, simply neutral. I'm Sheriff Dixon. I understand you've been through quite an ordeal. Catherine stared at him, unsure how to respond to this unexpected greeting. She needs to see her sister, Kade interjected, and a doctor wouldn't hurt. She's been living rough for 3 days. Sheriff Dixon nodded. Doc Williams has a room above his surgery where Clara's staying. We can go there now. He reached for his hat. Mrs. Blackwood, I'll need to take your statement, but it can wait until morning. Catherine blinked in surprise. You're not arresting me, the sheriff exchanged a glance with Kade. Not yet, madam. Deputy Morgan telegraphed me yesterday with some concerning information about your husband. I'd like to hear your side of the story before making any decisions. Relief made Catherine's knees weak. Cade's hand appeared at her elbow, steadying her. Thank you, she whispered. The three walked down the darkening street to a 2-story building with a sign reading Dr. E. Williams, physician. Sheriff Dixon knocked, and the door was opened moments later by a balding man with spectacles and kind eyes. Sheriff, he greeted, then noticed Catherine. Mrs. Blackwood. Thank goodness, your sister has been beside herself with worry. Clara's awake, Catherine asked, hope rising in her chest. Upstairs, Dr. Williams confirmed, stepping aside to let them enter. First door on the right. Catherine didn't wait for permission. She hurried up the narrow staircase, her heart pounding. The door was partially open, and she pushed it wide to see her sister sitting up in bed, a book open on her lap. Clara looked up, her face bruised but healing, transforming with joy. "Catherine," she cried, holding out her arms. Catherine flew across the room, gathering her sister in a gentle embrace. Tears flowed freely down both their faces as they clung to each other. "I thought you were dead," Catherine sobbed. "There was so much blood and you weren't moving." "I thought the same about you," Clara whispered. "When I woke up here, they told me you'd disappeared, that they thought you'd—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm here now," Catherine assured her, pulling back to examine her sister's face. A large bruise darkened one cheek and her lip was split, but her eyes, the same blue as Catherine's, were clear and alert. Did he?" Clara understood the unspoken question. "No," she said firmly. "You stopped him in time." She gripped Catherine's hands tightly. "You saved me, Catherine." "But at what cost to yourself?" Catherine shook her head. "Don't worry about that now, we're together, that's what matters." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Kade stood in the doorway, his expression apologetic. "Sorry to intrude," he said. "Doc Williams wants to check on Mrs. Blackwood, if that's all right." "Of course," Catherine said, reluctantly releasing her sister's hands. She turned to Clara with a reassuring smile. "I'll be right back. In a small examination room downstairs, Doctor." Williams confirmed what Catherine already knew. She was exhausted, malnourished, and sporting various minor cuts and bruises, but otherwise unharmed. He provided a simple remedy for the scrapes on her hands and recommended rest and regular meals. "You can stay here with your sister," he offered. "The room is paid for through the week." "Paid for," Catherine echoed in confusion. "By whom?" Dr. Williams glanced at Kade, who stood in the corner of the room. "Deputy Morgan arranged it," he said simply. Catherine turned to Kade, questions in her eyes, but he merely touched the brim of his hat. "Get some rest, Mrs. Blackwood," he said. "Sheriff Dixon will come by in the morning to take your statement." Before she could thank him, he was gone, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Dr. Williams provided her with a clean nightgown and a basin of warm water, then left her to wash and change. The simple act of removing the filthy dress and cleaning herself thoroughly brought tears to Catherine's eyes. She hadn't realized how deeply ingrained the feeling of being unclean had become. When she returned to Clara's room, her sister was waiting anxiously. "Tell me everything," Clara demanded, making room for Catherine on the narrow bed. Catherine settled beside her, and the story poured out her flight into the forest, the days of wandering, and finally, Kade finding her. Clara listened without interruption, her eyes widening at certain parts. "He sounds different from the other lawmen," she observed when Catherine described Kade's kindness. "He is," Catherine agreed, then quickly added, "but that doesn't mean we're safe. The town might still demand justice for Jeremiah's death." Clara's expression hardened. "Then they'll have to hear what kind of man he really was. I won't let you face this alone, Catherine." Catherine squeezed her sister's hand. "Get some sleep," she said gently. "We'll face whatever comes tomorrow." They curled together in the narrow bed as they had done as children during storms. Despite the uncertainty of her future, Catherine slept more peacefully than she had in years, knowing Clara was safe beside her. Morning brought a knock at the door. Catherine, already awake and dressed in borrowed clothes, opened it to find Sheriff Dixon, hat in hand. "Morning, Mrs. Blackwood," he said. "If you're feeling up to it, I'd like to take your statement now." Catherine nodded, glancing back at Clara, who was sitting up in bed. "I'll be right back," she promised her sister. The sheriff led her downstairs to the doctor's study, a small room lined with medical books. To her surprise, Kade was already there, standing by the window. He nodded in greeting, his face revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Please, sit down," Sheriff Dixon invited, indicating a chair. He took a seat across from her, pulling out a small notebook. "I want to hear exactly what happened the day your husband died, in your own words." Catherine took a deep breath and began, recounting the events just as she had told Kade in the forest. The sheriff listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When she finished, the room was silent save for the ticking of a clock on the mantel. "That matches what your sister told us," Sheriff Dixon said finally, "and the physical evidence we found at your home." Catherine looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "The position of the body, the state of the room," the sheriff explained. It supported a struggle, not a cold-blooded killing. He closed his notebook. Mrs. Blackwood, I've been sheriff here for only a month, but in that time, I've heard whispers about your husband. Things people were afraid to say openly. Whispers don't help much when you're living with a monster, Catherine said bitterly. No, they don't, Sheriff Dixon agreed, which is why I intend to change how things work in this town. He leaned forward. I believe you acted in defense of yourself and your sister. I won't be filing charges against you. The words took a moment to penetrate Catherine's understanding. You won't? No, madam, the sheriff confirmed. As far as I'm concerned, this case is closed. Jeremiah Blackwood died in a struggle after attacking your sister. You defended her, as anyone would. Relief washed over Catherine in a dizzying wave. She gripped the arms of her chair to steady herself. Thank you, she whispered. Sheriff Dixon stood, replacing his hat. You're free to return to your home when you feel ready. Deputy Morgan will escort you if you wish. After the sheriff left, Catherine sat in stunned silence, unable to fully process what had just happened. Kade remained by the window, watching her. You knew, she accused softly. You knew he wouldn't charge me, Kade shrugged. I hoped, he corrected. Sheriff Dixon is a fair man, and the evidence was on your side. Plus, he had already spoken to Clara and several other women in town who had experiences with your husband, so it's over. Catherine asked, still disbelieving. Just like that, the legal matter is over, Kade said carefully. But you still have choices to make, your home, your future. Catherine hadn't thought beyond survival for so long that the concept of choices seemed foreign. I don't know if I can go back to that house, she admitted. You don't have to decide today, Kade assured her. Or tomorrow, take time to heal, to think. Catherine studied him, trying to understand his interest in her welfare. Why are you helping me, Deputy Morgan? Kade met her gaze directly. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply. And because. He hesitated, then continued more quietly, because I've seen what happens when good people don't step forward to help those in need. There was a story there, Catherine sensed, but before she could ask, the door opened and Clara appeared, leaning on the frame for support. Clara, you should be resting, Catherine chided, rising to help her sister. I heard voices, Clara explained. I wanted to know what was happening. Her gaze shifted to Kade, curiosity evident in her expression. Sheriff Dixon has closed the case, Catherine told her, the words still feeling surreal. He believes I acted in self-defense. Clara's face lit up with joy. Oh, Catherine, that's wonderful news. She impulsively hugged her sister, then turned to Kade. Thank you, Deputy. Catherine told me how kind you were to her. Kade looked almost embarrassed by the gratitude. Just doing my job, Miss Blackwood. Will you take us home? Clara asked him, when the doctor says I can travel. Catherine tensed at the thought of returning to the house where so much pain had occurred, but she said nothing, not wanting to upset her sister. Kade glanced at Catherine, reading her discomfort. There's no rush, he said gently, and there are other options. Options? Clara echoed. The widow Peterson is looking for someone to help with her boarding house, Kade explained. She mentioned it might be a good place for you both to stay until you decide what's next. Catherine looked at him in surprise. You've been making arrangements for us. Suggestions, Kade corrected, a hint of color rising in his cheeks. The choice is yours. Clara squeezed Catherine's arm. The boarding house sounds perfect, she said. I couldn't bear to go back to that place. Relief flooded Catherine. Then we'll speak to Mrs. Peterson, she agreed. She turned to Kade. Thank you for thinking of this. Mrs. Peterson will be by later today, he informed them. She's eager to meet you both. As if summoned by his words, there was a knock at the front door downstairs. Moments later, Dr. Williams appeared with a plump, cheerful-looking woman in her 50s. Mrs. Blackwood, Miss Blackwood, he said. This is Mrs. Peterson. The widow hurried forward, her kind face wreathed in smiles. My dears, she exclaimed, taking both women's hands in hers. I've been so worried about you both. When Deputy Morgan told me what happened, she shook her head. Well, the past is past. Now we must look to the future. Her warmth was so genuine, her manner so motherly, that Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. It had been so long since anyone had shown such concern for her well-being. Deputy Morgan mentioned you might have room for us at your boarding house, she asked hesitantly. Room and welcome, Mrs. Peterson assured her. I have a lovely suite on the second floor, 2 bedrooms with a shared sitting room. It's yours for as long as you need it. We couldn't impose, Catherine began, but Mrs. Peterson waved away her objection. Nonsense. I've been wanting someone to help me with the place for ages. If you're half the seamstress people say, you'll earn your keep and more besides. Silver Creek has been desperate for a proper dressmaker. Clara squeezed Catherine's hand encouragingly. It sounds perfect, doesn't it? Catherine looked from her sister's hopeful face to Mrs. Peterson's kind one, and finally to Kade, who stood quietly observing. He gave her a small nod, as if confirming that this was a good path forward. We accept, Catherine said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. Wonderful, the widow exclaimed. Now, the doctor tells me Clara needs another day or two of rest before moving. That gives me time to prepare your rooms. She patted Catherine's cheek affectionately. Everything will be all right now, my dear, you'll see. After she left, Clara returned to bed at the doctor's insistence, leaving Catherine and Kade alone once more. Thank you, Catherine said quietly, for everything. Kade shifted, clearly uncomfortable with gratitude. I should get back to work, he said. Sheriff will be wondering where I am. Of course, Catherine said quickly. I've taken up too much of your time already. Kade hesitated at the door. Mrs. Blackwood Catherine, he corrected himself, the use of her given name surprising them both. If you need anything at all, you can find me at the sheriff's office or my cabin just outside of town. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within Catherine, a place she'd thought long dead. I'll remember that, she promised. After he left, Catherine returned to Clara's room, finding her sister already asleep again. She sat by the window, watching the town of Silver Creek go about its business in the morning light. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to think about the future with something other than dread. 2 days later, Dr. Williams declared Clara well enough to move to the boarding house. Kade arrived with a wagon, helping both women carefully aboard. The ride through town was uncomfortable for Catherine, who felt the stares of the townspeople acutely, but Clara chattered happily beside her, seemingly oblivious to the attention. Mrs. Peterson's boarding house was a large, well-maintained 2-story building at the edge of town, surrounded by a white picket fence and a garden that, even in early autumn, bloomed with late-season flowers. The widow greeted them at the door, ushering them inside with motherly efficiency. The suite she had prepared was bright and airy, with windows overlooking the garden. Simple but comfortable furniture filled the sitting room, and each bedroom was equipped with a proper bed, dresser, and washstand. After years in Jeremiah's sparse cabin, it seemed luxurious to Catherine. This is lovely, she told Mrs. Peterson sincerely. I don't know how to thank you. No thanks needed, the widow assured her. Now, there's hot water for bathing, fresh clothes in the dressers they may need taking in, but they'll do for now, and supper will be ready at 6. Get settled, rest, and we'll talk business tomorrow. After she bustled out, Clara spun around the sitting room, her face alight with joy. Oh, Catherine, isn't it wonderful? It feels like a fresh start. It does, Catherine agreed, her own heart lighter than it had been in years. She turned to Kade, who had carried their few belongings upstairs. We can't thank you enough, Deputy Kade, he corrected. When I'm not on duty, it's just Kade. The invitation to use his given name felt significant somehow. Kade, Catherine repeated, the single syllable warm on her tongue. He cleared his throat, suddenly awkward. I should let you get settled, he said. Good day, ladies. After he left, Clara collapsed onto the sofa with a theatrical sigh. He likes you, she announced. Don't be ridiculous, Catherine scolded, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. He was doing his job. His job was to bring you back for trial, Clara pointed out. Not to arrange housing and bring us here personally and look at you like you're the sunrise after a long night. Clara, Catherine exclaimed, scandalized and secretly pleased. I'm a widow of less than a week. A widow who never truly had a husband, Clara said soberly, all teasing gone from her voice. Jeremiah wasn't a husband to you, Catherine. He was a jailer. Catherine sank onto the sofa beside her sister, unable to deny the truth of her words. Even so, it's too soon to think of. Anything like that, Clara took her hand. I know, she said gently. I'm just saying, when you're ready, if you're ever ready, there's at least one good man in Silver Creek who sees you for who you really are." Catherine squeezed her sister's hand, unwilling to examine the flutter of hope those words ignited. "Let's focus on getting you fully recovered," she said, "and finding our place here." Over the next few weeks, Catherine and Clara settled into life at the boarding house, true to Mrs. Peterson's prediction. Catherine's sewing skills were in high demand. Word spread quickly that Silver Creek had a proper seamstress again, and orders began coming in first for simple repairs and alterations, then for dresses, shirts, and even a wedding gown for the banker's daughter. Clara proved to have a talent for cooking and helped Mrs. Peterson in the kitchen, gradually regaining her strength and spirits. The bruises on her face faded, as did the haunted look in her eyes. She made friends among the young people of the town, particularly with the milliner's assistant, a shy girl named Emily. Catherine saw Kade occasionally passing on the street, at church on Sundays, or when he stopped by the boarding house on official business. Each time, he was unfailingly polite, inquiring after her welfare and Clara's, but maintaining a careful distance. Catherine found herself looking forward to these brief encounters more than she cared to admit. One crisp October afternoon, Catherine was returning from delivering a finished dress to Mrs. Dixon, the sheriff's wife, when she encountered Kade outside the general store. He tipped his hat in greeting. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, "you're looking well." She was, in fact, looking better than she had in years. Regular meals, peaceful nights, and freedom from fear had restored the bloom to her cheeks and the luster to her hair, which she wore simply braided down her back. "Thank you, Deputy Morgan," she replied with a small smile. "How are you?" "Can't complain," he said. He hesitated, then added, "I heard your sewing business is thriving." "It is," Catherine confirmed. "I'm grateful for the work." An awkward silence fell between them, broken when the general store owner emerged with a crate that he handed to Kade. "There you go, Deputy," the man said. "Everything on your list." "Thanks, Mr. Simmons," Kade replied, balancing the crate easily. Catherine noticed several books among the supplies. "You're a reader?" she asked, surprised. Kade looked almost embarrassed. "When time allows," he admitted. "Winter's coming, long nights ahead." Catherine remembered the endless winter evenings in Jeremiah's cabin with nothing to do but dread his return from the saloon. "What do you like to read?" she asked, genuinely curious. "History mostly," Kade replied. "Some poetry." At her raised eyebrows, he added defensively, "A man can appreciate Tennyson, can't he?" Catherine laughed, the sound surprising them both. "Of course he can," she assured him. "I just wouldn't have expected it from a rough deputy," Kade finished, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "I was going to say from someone so busy," Catherine corrected. "I haven't had time for reading myself lately." "I have plenty of books," Kade offered. "You'd be welcome to borrow some if you'd like." The invitation seemed to hang in the air between them, weighted with meaning beyond the simple words. "That's very kind," Catherine said finally. "Perhaps when things slow down a bit." Kade nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The offer stands," he said. "Good day, Mrs. Blackwood." "Good day, Deputy," she replied, watching as he carried his supplies toward the sheriff's office. That evening, as Catherine sat sewing by lamplight in the sitting room, Clara entered with a determined expression. "I've had an idea," she announced. Catherine set aside her work. "What sort of idea?" "Thanksgiving is coming next month," Clara said, sitting beside her. "Mrs. Peterson says she always hosts a dinner for those with nowhere else to go. I thought perhaps we might invite Deputy Morgan." "Clara," Catherine began warningly. "Hear me out," her sister insisted. "From what I've gathered, he has no family nearby. He lives alone in that cabin of his and takes his meals at the hotel when he's not working. It seems only right to include him after all he's done for us." Put that way, it was hard to argue. Mrs. Peterson may already have invited him, Catherine pointed out. "She hasn't," Clara said triumphantly. "I asked. She said he always declines invitations, but she thought he might accept if you asked personally." Catherine narrowed her eyes. "Has Mrs. Peterson been matchmaking as well?" Clara's innocent expression wasn't the least bit convincing. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Clara. I'm not ready for anything like that," Catherine said gently. "It's too soon." Clara's face softened. "I know," she said, And I'm not suggesting anything improper. Just dinner with friends on a holiday. He deserves that much, doesn't he? Put that way, Catherine couldn't refuse. Very well, she agreed. I'll invite him, but don't read anything into it. Clara beamed. Of course not, she promised, though her eyes told a different story. The opportunity to extend the invitation came sooner than Catherine expected. The next day, a message arrived from Sheriff Dixon, requesting her presence at the office. Curious and slightly apprehensive, Catherine made her way there, finding both the sheriff and Kade waiting. Mrs. Blackwood, Sheriff Dixon greeted her. Thank you for coming. Please sit down. Catherine took the offered chair, looking between the two men. Is something wrong? Not at all, the sheriff assured her. Quite the opposite. We've received a letter from your sister-in-law in Denver, Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood. Catherine tensed. Jeremiah's sister had never approved of their marriage, considering Catherine beneath the family's station. What does she want? To apologize, it seems, Sheriff Dixon said, passing her a letter, and to settle some business matters. Catherine read the letter with increasing surprise. Eleanor expressed deep regret for her brother's actions, which she claimed not to have known about until after his death. She acknowledged Catherine's right to Jeremiah's property and enclosed signed documents transferring the deed of the house to Catherine's name, along with access to his bank account, which contained a considerable sum. She says she wants no part of her brother's estate, Catherine said, looking up in disbelief. That it's the least she can do after what her family put me through. It appears Mrs. Blackwood has a conscience after all, Sheriff Dixon observed. The documents are all in order. The house and the money are legally yours. Catherine sat back, stunned. Financial security had been so foreign to her for so long that she couldn't quite grasp it. I don't want the house, she said finally. Too many bad memories. You could sell it, Kade suggested. Use the money to start fresh. The idea took root immediately. Yes, Catherine agreed. I could open a proper dress shop in town. Her mind raced with possibilities. Clara could continue her education. We could, she broke off, overwhelmed. Sheriff Dixon smiled. It's a lot to take in, he acknowledged. Take your time deciding what to do. The property isn't going anywhere. After signing the necessary papers, Catherine prepared to leave, her mind still reeling from this unexpected turn of events. At the door, she remembered Clara's request. Deputy Morgan, she said, turning back. I wondered if you might join us for Thanksgiving dinner at Mrs. Peterson's. Clara and I would be honored if you would come. Kade looked genuinely surprised by the invitation. That's very kind, he said, but I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition, Catherine assured him. It's a thank you for everything you've done for us. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a recognition, a possibility. After a moment, Kade nodded. Then I accept, he said. Thank you. The smile that bloomed on Catherine's face was entirely unplanned and unguarded. Wonderful, she said. Until then. As Catherine walked back to the boarding house, her steps were lighter than they had been in years. The future, which had once seemed a dark and frightening place, now stretched before her, filled with possibilities. And if one of those possibilities included a certain deputy with kind eyes and a surprising taste for poetry, well, that was a thought for another day. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were busy ones for Catherine. With her newfound financial security, she rented a small storefront on Main Street and began setting up her dress shop. Word spread quickly, and orders poured in faster than she could fulfill them. She hired 2 assistants, young women eager to learn the trade, and found herself, for the first time in her life, a business owner in her own right. Clara, meanwhile, had begun taking lessons from the town school teacher in the afternoons, catching up on the education she'd missed. She blossomed in the structured environment, revealing a quick mind and particular aptitude for mathematics that surprised everyone except Catherine. Through it all, Catherine saw Kade occasionally on his rounds through town, at church on Sundays, or when he stopped by the shop on some pretext or another. Each time, their conversations grew a little longer, a little more personal. She learned that he had been born in Tennessee, had fought briefly for the Union during the war despite his southern roots, and had spent time living with the Shoshone after being wounded in a skirmish with cattle rustlers. In turn, She told him about her childhood following her surveyor father across the West, her love of books and music, and her dreams of someday visiting San Francisco. What she didn't tell him couldn't yet bring herself to share were the darkest moments of her marriage to Jeremiah. The humiliations, the pain, the crushing of her spirit day by day until she barely recognized herself. Those wounds were still too raw, the scars too fresh, yet somehow Kade seemed to understand. He never pressed, never asked for more than she was willing to give. His patience and gentle courtesy were so different from anything she had known with Jeremiah that sometimes it frightened her, this possibility of something good, something true. Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold, with a dusting of early snow on the ground. Catherine woke early, a mixture of anticipation and nervousness fluttering in her stomach. She selected a dress she had made herself, a deep burgundy wool with simple lines that complemented her figure without being ostentatious. Her hair she wore partially up, with soft curls framing her face. "You look beautiful," Clara declared when Catherine emerged from her bedroom. Her sister, in a green dress that brought out the blue of her eyes, looked equally lovely. "Deputy Morgan won't know what hit him." "Clara," Catherine scolded, though without heat. "This isn't about Deputy Morgan." "Of course not," Clara agreed with a mischievous smile. "Just as it's pure coincidence that you've spent an hour on your hair." Catherine chose to ignore this, instead focusing on helping Mrs. Peterson with the final dinner preparations. The boarding house dining room had been transformed for the occasion, with the long table set for 12 Mrs. Peterson's regular boarders. A few elderly residents of the town with no family nearby, the new schoolteacher, Clara, Catherine, and Kade. Guests began arriving at 1 o'clock, bringing small offerings: a jar of preserves, a bottle of wine, a bunch of late chrysanthemums. Kade was the last to arrive, looking somewhat uncomfortable in his Sunday best, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders well, his hair neatly combed, hat in hand. "Deputy Morgan," Mrs. Peterson greeted him warmly. "How lovely that you could join us." "Thank you for having me, madam," Kade replied, his eyes finding Catherine across the room. Something in his gaze, appreciation, admiration, made warmth bloom in her cheeks. Dinner was a joyous affair with Mrs. Peterson's excellent cooking, lively conversation, and a genuine sense of community that Catherine had rarely experienced. She found herself seated beside Kade, their arms occasionally brushing as they passed dishes back and forth. "You look beautiful," he said quietly at one point when the general conversation was loud enough to afford them privacy. "Happier too. I am happier," Catherine admitted. "I never expected to feel this way again." Kade's eyes were warm as they met hers. "You deserve it," he said simply. "All of it: the shop, your sister's recovery, a place in the community." "And what about you, Deputy?" Catherine asked, emboldened by his candor. "What do you deserve?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "I haven't given it much thought," he said after a moment. "I've always been focused on the job at hand." "There must be something you want for yourself," Catherine pressed gently. "Beyond duty." Kade was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. "There is," he admitted finally, "but I'm a patient man. Some things are worth waiting for." The implication in his words, in his steady gaze, made Catherine's heart beat faster. Before she could respond, Mrs. Peterson called for attention to offer a Thanksgiving toast, and the moment passed. After dinner, guests moved to the parlor for coffee and dessert. Catherine found herself by the window, watching the first real snowfall of the season begin outside. Kade joined her, a respectful distance between them. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Catherine said, nodding toward the gently falling snow. "Yes," Kade agreed, though his eyes were on her profile rather than the window. "Catherine," he began, then hesitated. She turned to face him, startled by his use of her given name. "Yes. I wondered if you might like to go for a ride tomorrow," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "Weather permitting. There's a place up in the hills, a view of the valley I think you might appreciate." It was the first time he had suggested anything resembling a social outing, just the two of them. Catherine knew she should hesitate, should consider the propriety of such an arrangement, but found herself nodding instead. "I'd like that," she said simply. The smile that transformed Kade's usually serious face was worth any risk to her reputation. "I'll come by around noon," he said. "If the snow stops, and if it doesn't, then I'll still come by," he replied, "and we'll find another way to pass the afternoon." The promise in his words stayed with Catherine long after he had left, long after the other guests had departed and she had retired to her room. She stood at her window, watching the snow continue to fall, covering Silver Creek in a blanket of pristine white. For the first time in years, the future seemed not just bearable, but bright with possibility. The snow continued through the night, but by morning the skies had cleared, leaving behind nearly a foot of fresh powder that sparkled in the winter sunshine. Catherine dressed warmly for her outing with Kade, a woolen dress with a high collar, sturdy boots, and the new coat she had made herself from deep blue wool. Clara, delighted by this development, insisted on helping Catherine prepare. "You should wear your hair down," she advised. "Men like that, and it's not as if anyone else will see you up in the hills." "Clara," Catherine exclaimed, scandalized and amused, "where did you learn such things?" "I'm 18, not 8, Clara reminded her with a grin. "Besides, Mrs. Peterson has been telling me stories about her courtship days." "This is not a courtship," Catherine protested, though without conviction. Clara's knowing look said she wasn't fooled. "Of course not," she agreed. "Just a friendly ride through the snow with a handsome deputy who looks at you like you hung the moon." Catherine blushed, but couldn't deny the accuracy of her sister's observation. There was something in Kade's gaze when it rested on her, a warmth, an appreciation that went beyond mere politeness or duty. At precisely noon, Kade arrived with a sleigh borrowed from the livery stable, pulled by his faithful Thunder and another horse, a sturdy bay. He had brought blankets, a thermos of hot coffee, and even a basket of food prepared by the hotel restaurant. "You've thought of everything," Catherine observed as he helped her into the sleigh. "I wanted it to be special," Kade admitted, settling beside her and arranging a warm buffalo robe over their laps. "Ready," Catherine nodded, suddenly shy in the face of his thoughtfulness. Kade clicked to the horses and they set off, the sleigh runners cutting smooth tracks through the unmarked snow. They passed through town, drawing curious glances from the few people braving the cold, then headed northwest into the hills that surrounded Silver Creek. The landscape was transformed by snow, familiar landmarks made new and magical by their white coating. Catherine found herself relaxing as they traveled, enjoying the crisp air on her face and the solid warmth of Kade beside her. "How did you learn to track so well?" she asked, remembering how he had found her in the forest that night that seemed so long ago now. "I told you I spent time with the Shoshone," Kade replied. "After I was wounded, a hunting party found me. Their medicine man saved my life. I stayed with them for nearly 2 years, learning their ways." "That must have been fascinating," Catherine said, "and unusual for a white man." "I wasn't interested in the usual path," Kade admitted. "After the war, after seeing so much death and destruction, I wanted something different, something true." The simple honesty in his words touched Catherine deeply. "Did you find it?" she asked. Kade was quiet for a moment, guiding the horses around a bend in the trail. "Parts of it," he said finally. "The Shoshone taught me to see the world differently, to recognize the patterns in nature, to understand that everything is connected. But when the reservation system began, when the government started forcing tribes onto designated lands," he shook his head. "I couldn't stop it. Couldn't protect the people who had saved me. So you became a lawman instead," Catherine guessed, "to protect others." "Something like that," Kade agreed, "though I'm finding there are many ways to make a difference, not all of them involving a badge and gun." The trail narrowed as they climbed higher into the hills, the horses picking their way carefully through the snow. Finally, they emerged onto a high plateau and Kade drew the team to a halt. "We're here," he said, setting the brake and turning to help Catherine down. The view was breathtaking. The entire valley spread before them, Silver Creek nestled in its center like a child's toy town. The snow-covered landscape glittered in the winter sunshine, the distant mountains forming a jagged blue backdrop against the clear sky. "Oh," Catherine breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "It's beautiful. I come here when I need to remember that the world is bigger than whatever problems I'm facing," Kade said, standing close beside her. "It helps put things in perspective. Catherine understood completely. Her own troubles, even the terror and pain of her marriage, seemed smaller when viewed from this height, against the vastness of the natural world. "Thank you for sharing this with me," she said softly. Kade smiled down at her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I've never brought anyone else here," he admitted. "It's always been just mine until now." The significance of his words wasn't lost on Catherine. This place was special to him, private, and he had chosen to share it with her. The gesture touched her deeply. "I'm honored," she said simply. They stood in companionable silence for a time, watching the play of light and shadow across the valley as clouds occasionally passed overhead. Eventually, the cold began to seep through even their warm clothing. "Shall we have that coffee?" Kade suggested, leading her back to the sleigh. He spread a blanket on a fallen log that he cleared of snow, then poured steaming coffee from the thermos into 2 tin cups. Catherine accepted hers gratefully, wrapping her gloved hands around the warm metal. "This was a wonderful idea," she said. "Thank you for suggesting it." "I've been wanting to bring you here for weeks," Kade confessed. "But I wasn't sure if it would be welcome." The hesitation in his voice, the careful way he watched her reaction, told Catherine more than words could about his feelings. This strong, capable man was uncertain with her, afraid of pushing too fast or too far. "It is welcome," she assured him gently, "very much so." Relief and something more crossed Cade's face. "Catherine," he began, setting his cup aside, "I know it hasn't been long since everything happened. I understand if you need more time, more space, but I want you to know that He paused, searching for the right words. "I care for you, more than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances." Catherine's heart raced at his declaration. Part of her wanted to retreat, to hide behind the walls she'd built during her years with Jeremiah. But a stronger part, the part that had found the courage to flee into the forest that night, the part that had begun to heal in these past weeks, pushed her forward. "I care for you too," she admitted softly. "It frightens me sometimes how much." Kade reached for her hand, enfolding it in his much larger one. "I would never hurt you," he promised. "And I'll wait as long as you need, months, years if necessary, until you're ready for whatever this might become." The sincerity in his voice, the patience and understanding in his eyes, broke something open inside Catherine, a door she had thought permanently closed. Impulsively, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his cheek, a brief, chaste kiss that nonetheless left them both breathless. "Thank you," she whispered, drawing back, "for finding me in the forest that night, for bringing me back to the light." Cade's eyes, when they met hers, were filled with such tenderness that Catherine felt it like a physical touch. "Thank you for letting me," he said simply. They finished their coffee and the sandwiches Kade had brought, talking easily about safer topics: the progress of Catherine's shop, Clara's studies, the upcoming Christmas celebrations in town. By tacit agreement, they set aside the deeper currents between them, content for now with this quiet companionship. The return journey to Silver Creek was made in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the boarding house, Catherine found herself wishing the day didn't have to end. "Would you like to come in?" she asked as Kade helped her down from the sleigh. "Mrs. Peterson always has hot chocolate in the afternoon, and Clara would love to see you." Kade hesitated, then shook his head reluctantly. "I should get the sleigh back to the livery," he said. "And I'm on duty this evening, but perhaps another time." "Of course," Catherine agreed, trying to hide her disappointment. Kade still held her hand, seemingly reluctant to let go. "Catherine," he said softly, "thank you for today. It meant more than I can say." "For me as well," she admitted. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Blackwood," he said formally, though his eyes held nothing formal in their gaze. "Good afternoon, Deputy Morgan," she replied with a small smile. Catherine watched as he drove away, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it. When she finally turned to enter the boarding house, she found Clara and Mrs. Peterson watching from the window, both wearing identical expressions of delight. "Don't say a word," Catherine warned them, though she couldn't keep the smile from her face. "We wouldn't dream of it, dear," Mrs. Peterson assured her, though her knowing wink said otherwise. That night, as Catherine prepared for bed, She found herself humming a tune she hadn't thought of in years, a simple love song her mother had often sung. For the first time since Jeremiah had shown his true nature, Catherine allowed herself to imagine a different kind of marriage, a different kind of life. One built on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than fear and control. It was too soon, she knew. The wounds of her past were still healing. But for the first time, she could see a path forward, one that included a certain deputy with kind eyes and gentle hands. Not immediately, perhaps not for some time, but someday. With that comforting thought, Catherine drifted into a peaceful sleep, free of the nightmares that had plagued her for so long. Winter settled over Silver Creek in earnest after Thanksgiving, bringing shorter days and long, cold nights. Catherine's dress shop thrived despite the weather, with orders for Christmas dresses and warm winter clothing keeping her and her assistants busy from dawn till dusk. Clara continued her studies and helped at the shop in the afternoons, her natural charm making her popular with customers. Kade became a regular visitor at the boarding house, joining them for Sunday dinners and occasional evenings by the fire. His courtship of Catherine, for that was what it had become, though neither used the word aloud, progressed slowly, respectfully. A walk through town after church, a sleigh ride on a clear afternoon, quiet conversations in Mrs. Peterson's parlor while Clara and the landlady tactfully found reasons to be elsewhere. As Christmas approached, Silver Creek transformed with festive decorations. Evergreen boughs adorned storefronts, red ribbons brightened doorways, and the church organized a community celebration with carols and a nativity play. Catherine found herself caught up in the preparations, sewing costumes for the children and a special dress for Clara, who had been asked to sing a solo during the Christmas Eve service. One snowy afternoon a week before Christmas, Kade appeared at the dress shop just as Catherine was closing for the day. "I thought you might like some company on your walk home," he offered, stamping snow from his boots in the doorway. "That would be lovely," Catherine replied, pleased by his unexpected appearance. She gathered her cloak and basket, locking the shop behind them as they stepped into the twilight. Fresh snow was falling, adding to the already considerable accumulation on the ground. Kade offered his arm, which Catherine took gratefully, finding her footing on the slippery boardwalk. "How was your day?" he asked, his breath visible in the cold air. "Busy," Catherine replied. "Mrs. Dixon ordered a new dress for the New Year's celebration, and I'm still finishing the shepherd's costumes for the nativity." "You've become indispensable to this town in a very short time," Kade observed with a smile. Catherine blushed at the compliment. "I enjoy the work," she said simply. "It's good to be useful, to create beautiful things." They walked in comfortable silence for a time, the only sounds the crunch of snow beneath their boots and the distant laughter of children at play. As they passed the general store, the owner called out to Kade, "Deputy. Package came for you on the afternoon stage." "Thank you, Mr. Simmons," Kade replied, leading Catherine inside the warm store. The shopkeeper handed over a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Christmas shopping?" Catherine asked teasingly as they continued their walk. "Something like that," Kade admitted with a mysterious smile. "Speaking of which, what would Clara like for Christmas? I've been at a loss." The question touched Catherine deeply, not just that he wanted to give her sister a gift, but that he cared enough to ask what would please her. "Clara loves books," she said after a moment's thought, "especially poetry, and she's developed quite an interest in astronomy since beginning her studies with Miss Jenkins." "Astronomy," Kade repeated thoughtfully. "That gives me an idea, thank you." They had reached the boarding house, but Kade made no move to leave despite the intensifying snowfall. "Catherine," he said, his voice suddenly serious, "I was wondering if you might join me for Christmas dinner at my cabin, just the two of us." The invitation surprised her. They had never been truly alone together, always in public or under Mrs. Peterson's roof. "What about Clara?" she asked, stalling for time as she considered the propriety of such an arrangement. "Mrs. Peterson has already invited her to join the boarding house celebration," Kade replied, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "It seems our friends have been conspiring." Catherine wasn't surprised. Both Clara and Mrs. Peterson had been none too subtle in their encouragement of Kade's attentions. I see, she said, fighting a smile. And what would this dinner entail? Nothing improper, Kade assured her quickly. Just a meal conversation. I'd like to share my home with you to show you who I am when I'm not wearing the badge. The sincerity in his voice decided her. Then I accept, Catherine said. Thank you for the invitation. The smile that lit Kade's face was worth any risk to her reputation. I'll come for you at noon, he promised, and have you home before dark. I'm not afraid of the dark, Catherine said softly, not anymore. Their eyes met in the falling snow, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Kade raised her gloved hand to his lips, as had become his custom when they parted. Until Christmas, then, he murmured. Until Christmas, Catherine echoed, reluctantly withdrawing her hand and entering the boarding house. She found Clara in the parlor, ostensibly reading but clearly waiting for her return. Well, her sister asked, setting aside her book. What did Deputy Morgan want? To invite me to Christmas dinner, Catherine replied, unwilling to hide the truth. At his cabin. Clara's eyes widened. Alone, how scandalous, she teased, then grew serious. Are you going to accept? I already have, Catherine admitted. Is that foolish of me? Clara crossed the room to take her sister's hands. It's not foolish to trust a good man, she said gently. And Kade Morgan is a good man, Catherine. Everyone in town says so. I know he is, Catherine said softly. That's what frightens me sometimes. After Jeremiah, I'm not sure I know how to. To be with someone kind, someone who respects me. You'll learn, Clara assured her. You're already learning. I see it every day how you stand straighter, speak your mind more freely, laugh more easily. You're becoming yourself again, the self you were always meant to be. Catherine hugged her sister tightly, grateful beyond words for her understanding and support. When did you get so wise? She asked, her voice thick with emotion. I had an excellent teacher, Clara replied, returning the embrace. Now, what are you going to wear for this Christmas dinner? It needs to be perfect. The days leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of activity. Catherine finished her orders, wrapped simple gifts for Clara and Mrs. Peterson, and, in secret moments, worked on a special present for Kade, a finely crafted vest of dark blue wool, embroidered with subtle silver threads that matched his eyes in certain lights. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear, the stars brilliant in the night sky as the townspeople gathered at the church for the special service. Catherine sat with Clara and Mrs. Peterson, her heart swelling with pride as her sister rose to sing Silent Night in a clear, pure soprano that brought tears to many eyes. Kade, seated with Sheriff Dixon and his family across the aisle, caught Catherine's eye during the hymns, his smile warm and private even in the crowded church. Later, as they filed out into the crisp night air, he made his way to her side. Merry Christmas, he said softly, his breath forming clouds in the cold. Merry Christmas, Catherine replied, suddenly shy under his admiring gaze. She wore her best dress, a deep green velvet with a fitted bodice and full skirt, and had arranged her hair in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck. You look beautiful, Kade said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Like something from a dream. The compliment brought color to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold. Thank you, she murmured. I'll see you tomorrow, he promised, touching her arm briefly before moving away to speak with the sheriff. Back at the boarding house, Catherine and Clara exchanged their gifts before bed: new gloves and a journal for Clara, a beautiful cashmere shawl for Catherine that her sister had saved for weeks to purchase. It's perfect, Catherine assured her, wrapping the soft fabric around her shoulders. How did you manage to keep it a secret? Mrs. Peterson helped, Clara admitted with a grin. She's quite the conspirator when she wants to be. Later, alone in her room, Catherine carefully wrapped Kade's vest in tissue paper and ribbon. It represented hours of meticulous work, but more than that, it represented hope for a future where gifts could be given and received with joy rather than fear, where kindness was the rule rather than the exception. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, sunlight sparkling on the fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Catherine woke early, her stomach fluttering with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. She dressed with particular care in a new dress of deep burgundy wool, high-necked but elegantly fitted, with her hair arranged in loose curls down her back, a concession to Clara's persistent advice. At precisely noon, a knock at the door announced Kade's arrival. Mrs. Peterson answered, ushering him into the parlor where Catherine waited. He had traded his usual deputy's attire for well-fitted dark trousers and a crisp white shirt under a black wool coat. His hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved, and in his arms he carried not only Catherine's wrapped gift but a bouquet of hothouse flowers that must have cost a small fortune to obtain in the middle of winter. "Merry Christmas, Catherine," he said, presenting the flowers with a slight bow. "You look lovely." "Merry Christmas," she replied, accepting the bouquet with a smile. "These are beautiful, thank you." Clara appeared from the kitchen, her eyes dancing with delight at the scene. "Deputy Morgan," she greeted him cheerfully. "Don't you look handsome today?" "Miss Blackwood," Kade returned with a smile, presenting her with a small package. "Merry Christmas." Clara's surprise and pleasure were evident as she accepted the gift. "Thank you, I have something for you as well." She disappeared briefly, returning with a wrapped parcel that she handed to Kade. "From both of us," she added, glancing at Catherine. "You shouldn't have," Kade protested, though he accepted the gift with evident pleasure. "Open it later," Catherine suggested, noting the time. "We should be going if dinner is to be ready on time," after promising Clara and Mrs. Peterson that she would return by evening. Catherine allowed Kade to help her into his waiting sleigh. The drive to his cabin was magical sunlight glinting off snow-laden branches, the jingling of the sleigh bells, and the comfortable silence between them. Kade's home was located about a mile outside of town, set back from the road in a small clearing surrounded by pine trees. The cabin itself was larger than Catherine had expected, a solidly built structure of logs with a stone chimney from which smoke curled invitingly against the blue sky. "It's beautiful," Catherine said as Kade helped her from the sleigh. "Did you build it yourself?" "Most of it," he admitted, leading her to the door. "I bought the land when I first came to Silver Creek. Building the cabin gave me something to do in the evenings, a way to settle, I suppose." The interior was simple but surprisingly comfortable, a main room with a large stone fireplace, wooden furniture that showed Kade's craftsmanship, bookshelves filled with well-worn volumes, and touches that spoke of a man who valued quality over quantity. A small kitchen area occupied one corner, where a pot simmered on the iron stove, filling the cabin with delicious aromas. "Please make yourself at home," Kade invited, taking her cloak and hanging it beside the door. "I'll see to the horses and be right back." Left alone, Catherine explored the cabin with curious eyes. The bookshelves revealed Kade's eclectic tastes: history, poetry, natural sciences, and several volumes in languages she didn't recognize. A desk beneath the window held neatly arranged papers and a framed photograph of a solemn couple who must be his parents. Everything was clean and orderly, yet comfortable rather than austere. When Kade returned, he found Catherine examining a beautiful quilt that hung on one wall, its intricate pattern unlike any she had seen before. "Shoshone work," he explained, coming to stand beside her. "A gift from the family that took me in. The pattern tells a story, see how the symbols connect. It's about finding one's path, even when the way seems dark." "It's exquisite," Catherine said, tracing the pattern with her eyes. "Thank you for sharing it with me." "I want to share everything with you," Kade said quietly, the simple statement carrying profound meaning. Their eyes met, and Catherine felt the now familiar flutter in her chest, part fear, part excitement, wholly new. Kade seemed to understand her unspoken response, neither pushing forward nor retreating. "Are you hungry?" he asked, breaking the moment gently. "Dinner is almost ready." "Starving," Catherine admitted with a smile, grateful for his sensitivity. Kade proved to be a surprisingly accomplished cook. The meal he had prepared was simple but delicious: roast venison, potatoes, fresh bread he admitted buying from the hotel restaurant, and vegetables preserved from his own garden. "You continue to surprise me, Deputy Morgan," Catherine observed as they sat at the small table near the fire. "Tracking, building, cooking, is there anything you don't do well?" "Plenty," Kade admitted with a self-deprecating smile. I can't sing a note in tune, I'm terrible at cards, and despite years of trying, I still can't speak Shoshone without making the children laugh at my accent. Catherine laughed, charmed by his candor. We all have our limitations, I suppose. What about you? Kate asked, refilling her glass with wine. What can't the accomplished Mrs. Blackwood do? Catherine considered the question. I never learned to swim, she confessed. And I'm hopeless with numbers. Clara has to help me with the shop accounts. Oh, and I can't abide spiders. Not very brave of me, I know. I think you're the bravest person I've ever met, Kade said seriously, all teasing gone from his voice. Catherine looked down at her plate, uncomfortable with the praise. You found me running away, she reminded him. That's hardly brave. You survived years with a man who hurt you, Kade countered gently. You protected your sister at great personal risk. Then you started over in the same town where it all happened, building a new life from nothing. If that's not courage, I don't know what is. His words touched something deep within Catherine, a place that had begun to heal but still held doubt. Thank you, she said softly, for seeing me that way. It's the truth, Kade replied simply. After dinner, they moved to the comfortable chairs before the fire. Catherine presented Kade with his gift, suddenly nervous about his reaction. I made it, she explained as he carefully unwrapped the package. If it doesn't fit, or if you don't like it, I won't be offended. Kade unfolded the vest, his expression one of wonder as he examined the fine stitching and subtle embroidery. Catherine, he breathed, this is extraordinary. I've never owned anything so fine. The blue matches your eyes, she admitted, blushing slightly. At least when the light hits them a certain way. You've been watching my eyes, Kade asked, a hint of teasing in his voice. Perhaps, Catherine conceded, meeting his gaze directly. Kade set the vest carefully aside and reached for the package he had brought for her. Your turn, he said, handing it to her. The box was small, wrapped in simple brown paper tied with a red ribbon. Catherine opened it carefully to reveal a velvet case. Inside, nestled on white satin, was a pendant, a perfect silver star suspended on a delicate chain. Oh, she breathed, lifting it from the case. It's beautiful. It reminded me of the night I found you, Kade explained. The stars were so bright, guiding me to where you were hiding. He hesitated, then added softly, some people believe stars are souls who watch over us. I like to think someone was watching over you that night, and every night since. Tears pricked Catherine's eyes at the thoughtfulness behind the gift. Will you help me put it on? She asked, holding out the necklace. Kade moved to kneel before her chair, taking the delicate chain in his large hands. Catherine turned, lifting her hair to expose her neck. She felt his fingers, warm and slightly calloused, brush against her skin as he fastened the clasp. When she turned back, his face was inches from hers, his eyes dark with an emotion she recognized but had never before welcomed. Catherine, he said softly, his voice rough with restraint, may I kiss you? The question, so simple and yet so profound in its respect for her choice, melted the last of Catherine's reservations. Yes, she whispered. Kade cupped her face gently in his hands, as if she were made of the finest porcelain, and leaned forward to press his lips to hers. The kiss was tender, questioning, a request rather than a demand. Catherine responded hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, her hands coming to rest on his shoulders. When they finally drew apart, both were breathing unevenly. Kade rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. I've wanted to do that since the day I found you in the forest, he admitted. Even then, Catherine asked, surprised. I was hardly at my best. Kade opened his eyes, his gaze steady on hers. Even then, he confirmed. There was something about you, a strength, a light, even in your darkest moment. I knew then that you were special. Catherine touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw with wondering fingers. After Jeremiah, she had never expected to feel this way about a man again, safe, cherished, desired but not objectified. I care for you, Kade Morgan, she said softly, more than I thought possible. And I love you, Catherine Blackwood, he replied without hesitation. I don't expect you to return those feelings, not yet, but I wanted you to know. The declaration should have frightened her, should have sent her retreating behind the walls she'd built during her marriage. Instead, it filled her with a warmth that spread from her heart outward, melting the last of the ice Jeremiah had left behind. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to say more but hoping he understood what she couldn't yet articulate. From his smile, he did. "No rush," he assured her, rising to his feet and returning to his chair. "We have time." They spent the remainder of the afternoon in conversation that ranged from the practical to the philosophical. Kade told her more about his time with the Shoshone, about his dreams of someday building a larger home on his property, perhaps raising horses. Catherine shared memories of her childhood, her love of creating beautiful things from fabric, her hopes for Clara's future. As the winter sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow outside, Kade reluctantly mentioned that they should start back to town. Catherine was surprised to find herself disappointed that the day was ending. "This has been wonderful," she said as he helped her with her cloak. "Thank you for inviting me." "Thank you for coming," Kade replied, "for trusting me enough to come here alone." The ride back to Silver Creek was made in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The star pendant rested warm against Catherine's skin beneath her dress, a tangible reminder of the day's significance. At the boarding house door, Kade helped her down from the sleigh. "I'd like to call on you properly," he said, still holding her hand, "if that would be acceptable." Catherine smiled up at him in the gathering twilight. "More than acceptable," she assured him. Kade raised her hand to his lips, but at the last moment he gently pulled her closer instead, bending to kiss her once more briefly but with unmistakable feeling. "Merry Christmas, Catherine," he murmured. "Merry Christmas, Kade," she replied, her voice soft with promise. As winter gave way to spring, Catherine and Kade's courtship became the talk of Silver Creek. They were seen together at church, at community gatherings, walking arm in arm through town on pleasant evenings. Catherine's shop continued to thrive, and Clara excelled in her studies, blossoming into a confident young woman with dreams of becoming a teacher herself. In April, when the first wildflowers appeared on the hillsides, Kade took Catherine riding to the high plateau where he had first brought her during the winter. Now transformed by spring growth, the view was even more spectacular, the valley below a patchwork of green and gold, the distant mountains still capped with snow. They spread a blanket beneath a pine tree, sharing a picnic lunch and comfortable conversation. As they were preparing to return to town, Kade suddenly grew serious. "Catherine," he began, taking her hands in his, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. I never expected to find someone like you, someone strong and kind and beautiful inside and out." Catherine felt her heart begin to race, recognizing the moment for what it was. "Kade," she started, but he shook his head gently. "Please let me finish while I have the courage," he requested with a smile. From his pocket he withdrew a small box. "I love you, Catherine. I want to spend my life with you if you'll have me." He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring, a single pearl set in silver. "Will you marry me?" Catherine looked from the ring to Kade's face, seeing there all the love and respect she had once thought impossible to find. Tears filled her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Yes," she said simply. "With all my heart, yes." Kade's face transformed with happiness as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he gathered her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that spoke of both love and promise. They were married in June, beneath an arbor of roses in Mrs. Peterson's garden. Clara stood as Catherine's attendant, radiant in a dress her sister had made specially for the occasion. Sheriff Dixon was Kade's best man, and the entire town turned out to witness the union of their deputy and the seamstress, who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. After a brief honeymoon trip to Denver, they returned to Kade's cabin, now expanded with a new bedroom and a larger kitchen, with plans for further additions as their family grew. Catherine continued to run her dress shop, now with 3 full-time assistants, while Kade divided his time between his deputy duties and improving their property. Clara remained at the boarding house, completing her education and beginning to assist at the school. Her natural affinity for teaching became apparent to everyone, and by the following year, she had been offered a position of her own at a new school opening in the growing town. On the first anniversary of the day Kade had found Catherine in the forest, they returned to the high plateau that had become their special place. The leaves were turning, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber that matched the pendant Catherine still wore daily around her neck. "Happy anniversary," Kade said, wrapping his arms around his wife from behind as they gazed out over the valley. "Which anniversary?" Catherine asked with a smile, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Our wedding was in June." "The anniversary of the day that changed everything," Kade clarified. "The day I found you in the forest and brought you back to Silver Creek. The day you carried me back to the light," Catherine said softly, turning in his arms to face him. "I was so lost then, so afraid. And now?" Kade asked, his eyes searching hers. Catherine smiled, taking his hand and placing it over her abdomen, where the first subtle swell of their child was just becoming visible. "Now I'm found," she said simply, "and I've never been less afraid in my life." Kade's face registered shock, then pure joy as he understood the meaning of her gesture. "A baby," he whispered. "We're having a baby," Catherine nodded, her own happiness reflected in his expression. "In the spring," she confirmed. "Dr. Williams says everything looks perfect." Kade gathered her close, his embrace gentle but fierce with emotion. "I love you," he said against her hair, "more than I can ever express." "I love you too," Catherine replied, the words no longer difficult to say, no longer frightening to feel. "Always." As they rode back to their home, to the life they had built together from the ashes of pain and fear, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the darkness of the forest to the light of Kade's love, it had been a path of healing, of rediscovery, of learning to trust not just him but herself as well. She had tried to disappear that night, to lose herself in the wilderness rather than face what lay ahead. Instead, she had been found not just by the deputy tracking her footsteps, but by the woman she was always meant to be. And in finding herself, she had found a love that would carry her through whatever challenges the future might hold, a love as vast and enduring as the Wyoming sky above them.